Yeah. Okay, so welcome everyone, and to the latest in the LSTM school seminar series. So it gives me great pleasure today to introduce Professor Steve Lindsay, who's come down from Durham University. So Steve is no stranger to many of us, and certainly no stranger to the school. He's been coming and very kindly teaching MSc students here for at least 10 years. But the last time he was actually here to give a school seminar was probably about 6-7 years ago, something like that.
I don't remember at all.
Well, there we go.
Oh, yes, I do.
I actually do remember it. But it was very interesting what Steve was presenting back then. I'm not sure who else was there, but he was talking then about what at the time was really a groundbreaking trial that had been conducted in the Gambia. So this was looking at the impact of screening of traditional African houses with screening of the roofs, the eaves, and doors, and really found some very promising results. But something that struck me at the end of that presentation was that Steve very honestly said, but the thing I've noticed since we conducted the trial was that things are changing. So specifically, the type of housing that Steve was encountering during subsequent visits to the Gambia was changing. And I think I presume it's probably one of the factors that have inspired Steve to look further and sort of more deeply into the kind of innovative roles that housing changes can play in the fight against malaria. And indeed, that's why he's here today, or that's what he's here to talk to us about today, I believe.
That's better than my talk.
Thank you.
I'm off. Okay, lovely to see so many people here. I'm going to talk about housing. And I'll assume that none of you know anything about malaria and give you a bit of background to begin with and look at the evidence for housing being protective, and importantly to think about how we can stop mosquitoes getting into houses and spreading disease. So that's really what it's about. So to start off with, I want to make it clear that my focus is on malaria in sub-Saharan Africa, but what I talk about here has resonance for other places, other parts of the world, other vector systems. So this is just sort of indicative. And this is a slide probably that many of you are familiar with. It comes from the Gates, showing the importance of the mosquito killing people around the world, 725,000. Well, I was thinking about this because I think it's far more important than that. And particularly this mosquito, which is Anopheles gambiae. This is the main malaria vector for sub-Saharan Africa, which has to be one of the great candidates for the greatest killer of humankind, because way back in the 1980s, it would be 1 to 2 million children dying each year from malaria caused by this vector. So going back into time, we can only guess at the sort of huge numbers of people that have died from this disease transmitted by this mosquito. The important thing is, why is this mosquito such an efficient vector? It's because it's really good at feeding on us, it feeds at night, and importantly, it feeds indoors at night in houses. So you can hopefully enjoy this lecture from two levels. One is it's something really important that we understand how mosquitoes get into houses. But also you can hopefully enjoy it because we can look at ways of preventing this. Because something like 80 to 100% of malaria transmission still occurs indoors. That is beginning to change in some areas with some species becoming more exophilic, feeding outside. But I want you to reflect on this because this is Anopheles gambiae's ability to get inside an African house. Now actually, every time I look at this, I wince somewhat because I don't think this is absolutely true. I think the mosquito is coming in at higher levels than this, but imagine yourself lying in a house in Africa, the little red spots are the odors that you produce coming out of the open eaves. Now it's important that you understand the structure of African houses, typical African houses, because there's a gap between the top of the wall and the roof. And the open eaves are the main way in which the mosquito gets inside. Fine. Now, what I'm going to take you through now is the process that one would assess any intervention. And you would start off by trawling the literature to see whether housing is protective. So what one does is carry out a systematic review of the literature and a meta-analysis. And that's what Lucy Tustings and some of us did. We looked at lots of studies, 15,000 studies that mention malaria and housing, and we looked at the results of 53 studies that were done. Now, I need to explain to you about these wonderful things called odds ratios. I want you to imagine that we are all Africans living in African villages. Some of us have malaria, some of us don't. Some of us live in nice houses, some of them live in less nice houses. So if we look at the odds of having malaria in those with nice houses versus the odds with traditional houses, if that odds ratio is 1, it means that the risk of having malaria is the same in both groups. So what we can produce mathematically is a little figure like this, and it shows the red spot is more or less 1, so it means in this case that good housing is not protective. And those funny little things either side of it are the whiskers and the 95% confidence intervals, which means that 95% of the time that mean is going to be between those two extreme values. It overlaps 1, there is no protection. This is still not protective, even though the red dot, the mean, is somewhere away from 1, but this one is. So that indicates protection. If it goes the other way, then we start to worry because modern housing is increasing the risk of malaria, okay? So we're looking at it over on the left side. And then if you look at this analysis, what you see here is numerous studies that were done in different parts of the world. And really what I want to point out to you is that most of these red dots are on the left-hand side, and this is the overall analysis indicating there's protection. This is similar sort of data, but it's adjusting for socioeconomic status here. It's to the left, so it's indicating that good housing is protective against infection. This is with clinical malaria up here, and all I'm pointing out to you is that it's all over to the left. So that's sort of good news. So it's suggesting that the amount of malaria infection is decreased by half. In these poor communities, those with good housing, whatever that means, is people are protected against malaria compared to those with traditional type housing. And that goes for clinical malaria as well. Problem with this is that although we adjust for socioeconomic status, you can't fully remove it, perhaps, is the question, unless you do a randomized controlled trial, which I'll come on to in a minute. So that's one suite of data. And then Lucy managed to get her hands on survey data from more recent data from 29 sites where they're using a similar methodology for collecting data. Now, in Liverpool, we all love bed nets, don't we? So we're all very comfortable with bed nets providing protection against malaria. So when you do the analysis here, again, you can see most of these little dots are to the left, few oddities, and overall, you're showing protection with bed nets. Well, thank God for that, because that's what we're expecting, some protection with bed nets. So if you do the same analysis with good housing, you get a similar sort of reduction with good housing. So we're not saying it's better than bed nets, we're just saying there's an indication that it's protective. And as I said earlier, the only way you can really get an idea of whether the housing is protective is by carrying out a randomized controlled trial. Because when you randomize, the beauty of it is those confounders, the factors which mess it up, are the same in both groups. And what Dave was alluding to at his introduction was when I was here 7 years ago, I reported the results of this trial, and I just throw them up again. So this is the 3-armed randomized trial where we've got 100 control houses. So this is just someone sleeping in an untreated bed net in those days. We put in screen ceilings here, and what we're doing here is the idea is to turn a house into a mosquito trap. So the odours are coming out of the eaves, the mosquitoes go in through the eaves, but they can't get down to feed on the people because of the screen ceiling. Okay, that's the hypothesis. And in this one, it's what we were normally expecting, where we fill the eaves in and we screen the doors and windows. Okay, fine. that's what the screen ceilings look like. And there's a little gap of air, of light coming over that right-hand picture there, showing that the eaves are open, but the netting is here, so they can't get down any further. And then the full screened housing is this door. Actually, this is interesting. This door is found in the 1984 Environmental Management book from WHO. And I tracked down its origin. It comes from a 1932 paper from the Tennessee Valley authorities. I'm sure we can do better than this, really. But anyhow, screened doors, fill the eaves in. And if there are windows, we screen those as well. What do we find? Well, we found very efficiently we were able to reduce the number of mosquitoes coming in by half with, whoops, let me go back, by either screen ceilings. So we reduced the number of coming in from 12 to 6, and 5 here. So a similar sort of reduction in the number of mosquitoes, roughly a half. And then if you look at anemia, and of course anemia is really important because it's what kills children under 2. So if you can stop anemia, you could have an impact on mortality. And again, we're finding a similar sort of level of protection, of a reduction in the odds ratio of half with a screen ceiling, and with the severe anemia, they're not different because we don't have sufficient numbers, but they look as though they're going in the right direction as well. So that's implying that not only did we have an impact on mosquitoes, we had an impact on reducing anemia. Fine. And we're currently doing another randomized control trial. This is the roof study, and the PF there is for Plasmodium falciparum, and the roof, and the P is silent, of course, as in sea bathing. That little joke there is for Phil. He'll explain it to you at the end. And what we did was we took 800 traditional houses, these are mud wall thatch houses, open eaves, and we randomly assigned them to 2 groups. Those, half of them we left with their thatch roof houses, like this one, and in this one we put on a metal roof because housing is transitioning from thatch to metal throughout Africa, or many parts of Africa. Now what we did here, which was slightly unusual, is we're trying to do 2 things. We've got 2 opposing forces here. One is we're trying to keep mosquitoes out, but we're also trying to keep it cool inside. So we want to ventilate it, and we know the metal roofs are going to be hot. So what we've got here is a window which is screened. So it might not seem like that from if you're sitting at the back, but this is screened. So it's to try and allow air to circulate within the house. And the door here looks louvered, well it is louvered, but inside it's screened. Okay, so that's actually screened inside so mosquitoes can't get in, unless you have small boys with razor blades that like running their razor blades down the screening because it feels nice, or whatever small boys' logic is. So, and that's the sort of door that we put in the back door. Again, just trying to allow as much air as possible to pass through the house to keep it cool. I haven't got the results of those trials, but that trial is in progress. So when I think about a system, I want to understand how it works fundamentally. So I wanted to understand how the design of a house would influence mosquitoes coming in. And we got a few surprises. But the basic idea is, as I've said earlier, this keeping mosquitoes out but trying to keep it cool. And keeping it cool is really important if we want to encourage people to use a bed net. Because we know from a meta-analysis is the most common reason that people don't use a net is because it's too bloody hot at night. So we want to keep it cool for that reason as well. Here's another image that Phil will remember from play school days, I think it is. But trying to break down the house into discrete units. So the questions we want to ask is, what sort of roof, does a roof matter, what it's made of, what the roof is made of in a house to mosquito entry? And particularly the gaps as well around the roof. Does the door matter? Does the window matter? And so we went to one of my old study sites, Walikunda, which is in the middle of of the Gambia, and it's surrounded by a rich area of rice fields, and hopefully this will work. Oh, my goodness. It's a bit fuzzy to begin with. So what we're doing here is we're taking a flight from the village of Wellingara, where our study's going on, and we're going west at sunset, looking, passing over the terrain, and very beautiful it is, very flat it is. And what you can see there is the old flashes of aquatic habitat down there, a bit down there to the right. But what we're really interested in is what's coming up next. Huge area of extensive rice field. Now this is nirvana for Anopheles gambiae, particularly at this stage where you've got a lot of open water, small amount of rice. Huge. So this is where our mosquitoes come from. So what we're doing now is turning round and coming back to the village. And what I want to draw your attention to, as we approach the outside of the village, you'll see some experimental houses that we've got up. And see if we can find them. We'll get closer in a minute. Talk amongst yourself while it's happening. Here we go. Can you see this line of houses? So these are the same size, but different types of roofing in this particular first study. And this is where we did our experiments. Okay. So the first type is our reference type. So these are houses which are the average size of a Gambian house. So if you guys are interested in doing anything like this, it's important to build to scale, because the way that materials heat up and release heat depends on their mass and the amount that you've got. So what we've got here is our thatch roof. It's got open eaves, and it's got a badly fitting door. So we leave a 2 centimetre gap above the top and the bottom of the doors. So the only way that mosquitoes can get in this house if the eaves are closed is through the doors. So no windows on this one. So you can see from this drawing that the doors are open. So this is type 1. Type 2, we fill the eaves because that's a very simple intervention, and people do close their eaves, increasingly do close their eaves in the Gambia. Then we're putting in screen doors because we're trying to cool it. That's the third type. And the fourth type, which is what is now becoming more common in most parts of the Gambia, is sticking a metal roof on it. And in that case, they're closing the eaves because they feel wrongly that if you fill the eaves in, that the wind won't take the roof off during high winds. And actually, that's not how the wind works. The wind is like as it goes over an aeroplane wing, and it actually sucks out sucks off the sheets. So that's our fourth type, the modern variety. And then just for good luck, we stuck our roof's house, which has got the ventilated eaves and screen doors, just to see what that was doing. So that's our fifth house. And then what we did was we had one person or two people in each of the houses that stayed there for the whole of the catching season, and we put in light traps to collect mosquitoes, and we measured the temperature and humidity with data loggers. And this is what the row of houses look like, with a Met station outside so we could look at outside conditions. And we did something which is slightly complicated, but we ran this with a Latin square design. So on week 1, we're collecting for 5 nights, and the metal roof house is in position 1. And then over the weeks, if you look at the purple square, rectangle, then it moves around to each of the 5 different positions. Now, why the hell do we go to do that? Because it might be, if you didn't do that, that the position of the house would influence the number of mosquitoes that we're getting. So we're adjusting for geographical position. And just so I said to my student Ibrahima and my guys in the Gambia, I said, yeah, just change the houses every week. It's fine. Rebuild them. They said, how on earth are we going to do that? So let's hope I can show you how they did that. So, so the village leader, the alcalde, is a small man. He's got the stick at the front, but anyhow. So great theatre, and apparently every weekend people from surrounding villages would come and watch this movement. We were never short of people. You couldn't do this in Liverpool. So, anyhow, so that's what we did. We moved the roofs around and rebuilt the houses every week. And these are the results that we got. Let me just take you through this. So here's our reference house. So this cartoon shows a thatched house with open eaves, badly fitting doors. So we're getting 15 Anopheles gambi per night. If you close the eaves, then you drop the number coming in by somewhere around 90%. So that won't cost you anything, but it will make it hotter inside. So, and then we get the same with a screen door as well. So that's good. No surprises there. But what we found was very odd, was this result. These are with metal roof houses. We thought, we're closing the eaves here. This should be the same as this. This should reduce the number of mosquitoes coming in. I'll give you the answer later on, but we got some surprises here. And this is our screen door here, where we reduce the numbers. So that was odd. Let's look at what happens when you look at the heat coming out from these houses. So here's a thatch roof house, and the white is hot. During the day, it's baking, and at night, it's the other way round. And the problem is, with African houses, they're made of the wrong materials. The walls are too thick, high thermal content. So you heat them during the day, they release the heat at night. It's too hot, unlike Southeast Asia, where they make buildings from lightweight materials which cool down rapidly at night. That's the metal roof house, really hot roof during the day, and at night that metal loses its heat rapidly, but those bricks at the bottom are just radiating out the heat. So, okay, so let's look at the temperature and what's going on. So the first thing here is the outside temperature. And what we can see with the houses is that irrespective of the type, they're all being buffered. And this is the daytime, and this is sunset, or evening, and this is the morning, dark. And this is the metal roof houses. So what we're getting is, with the metal roof houses, really hot temperatures in the afternoon, over 32, 34 degrees centigrade. So for what it's worth, here's Lindsay's rule. Anything over 30, really bad. It doesn't matter whether you're a maize plant, you're a malaria parasite in a mosquito or a human being, organisms begin to struggle over 30. And I'll come on to explain a bit more about that later. So those are the metal roofs, bloody hot in the afternoon and in the evening. Whereas the thatch houses tend to be cooler. So I think that's all I want to explain here. Now, the question is, so what? What does that mean for human comfort? Well, this is a psychrometric graph, and I'm imagining that in this room, we're about 20 degrees centigrade and probably, 60% relative humidity. Now, if we stayed in this room all afternoon, God forbid, and we kept on measuring the temperature and relative humidity every 10 minutes or so, you'd get this shotgun effect somewhere around here, yeah, of points. So that's what you're going to see next. So this is the temperatures in the different houses in the evening. So when people are making a decision to go to bed. So this is our reference. This is the thatch roof open eaves. And the funny little falling over candle here represents what human beings find comfortable. What this summary value is saying, that 34% of the time in a thatch roof house, that climate is comfortable. Fill the eaves in, it drops to 20. You ventilate, it's fine. This is the metal roof house. Only 2% of the times is it comfortable for human beings. But you can ventilate and make it cooler. After midnight, it's also actually quite uncomfortable, but for the opposite reason of before midnight. Before midnight, it's too hot, and after midnight it's too cold. Now, we don't worry about cold, do we? Particularly if we live in Liverpool, because if we're cold, we wrap ourselves up, and so that's what you do here. You have a sheet and you're not uncomfortable. But you can't deal with the heat. Cold you can. So coming back to this question then, is what was that strange result about the metal roof house? What was going on there? So here we've got the thatch roof house, and this is the metal roof house, looking at carbon dioxide production. First of all, it's extraordinarily variable. But overall, I would think you can, and we run the statistics on this, there's far more CO2 being produced in the metal roof house than the thatch one. So I presume that the odour plumes coming out of that door are going much further distances and attracting mosquitoes in from greater distance. It's about understanding temperature on airflow on carbon dioxide as a measure of host odours. Okay, that's what we're thinking about. So that could be the explanation. Right. My goodness, that was the roofs. So what about doors and windows? And it does get interesting, so don't fall off. So first of all, we looked at the doors. Does it matter? This is a sort of question that entomologists ask, and nobody else would ask such things. Does it matter if you have a gap at the top of the door or the bottom of the door for Anopheles gambiae to get in? So our reference house is 2 gaps at the top and bottom. This one is just at the top, this one is just at the bottom, and we ran out of ideas here, so we stuck a window in as well. And the short answer is it makes no difference. The Anopheles gambiae will get into a house easily at the gap at the top of the door as it will at the bottom. Not so with other mosquitoes. So culisines, they don't like going up. But with Anopheles gambiae, they don't care. They go up. Fine. Then we went to think about windows. Now, the only reason I did this experiment was because I wanted to see whether we could cool the inside of the house down. So our reference here is a shuttered window with little gaps at the top and bottom. But then we've got 1 window, 2 windows, 3 windows, okay? Hopefully you're up to speed with that one. And this is our little window. And the buggers, when I was saying, well, what's the size of the windows? Nobody would answer my emails. So I had to resort to looking at some of my old papers with experimental huts. Because this is the average, this is the size of my experimental hut window. And it's diminutive, to say the least. So what did we find here? Well, nothing with 1 window, but this was interesting. We started to get a reduction the more windows we put in compared to the reference. So then we did the proper experiment. I said, right, what's the average size of the windows in our Wellingarra village? So we measured those and we got the average size, and we did the experiments again with proper size windows. So this is the reference window, and this is one with 2 windows. So what we've got here is the reference, 1 window, 2 windows, 3 windows. I love it when you see gradation. Very surprising. And what I did, which is a bit naughty, because bringing together 2 experiments together is not a wise thing to do, but I couldn't resist it, so I did. And this shows you the percentage reduction in Anopheles gambiae by increasing the area of screen window, including the little windows and the big windows. And I thought this was interesting. There's no insecticide here. So, but that doesn't mean that insecticide on the windows will be a bad thing, because when I showed these results to Mark Rowland in London, he said, have you thought of what happens to mosquitoes once they get inside with these windows? I said, I hadn't. But I have thought about this, and I'm thinking, if you treated these windows with the insecticide, those mosquitoes that hadn't fed during the night would then be moved towards exiting to the windows, and you may well kill them that way. So you could really zap mosquito population. All right, so far I've hopefully given some idea of how changes in architecture might influence mosquitoes coming in. And this is all about personal protection. Now, if you do vector control tools, people will sneer at you. They say, no, what we want, Steve, is a community effect. But I think there may be a community effect with metal roofs, and we did this experiment. We took these cages and we put blood-fed mosquitoes in. Now, for those of you that don't know about mosquitoes, let me explain. So if we stayed here tonight, God forbid, and we released lots of mosquitoes in here, they would feed on you, right? And it would take them, if this was in a warm enough room, it would take them 2 days to digest the blood meal to turn into eggs. And it's only when they're ready to lay the eggs will they leave the room. So what that means is that in the Gambia, a blood-fed mosquito will rest inside for 2 days. So they can't escape the climate inside. So we did this experiment. We had cages of blood-fed mosquitoes in thatch houses and cages of blood-fed mosquitoes in the roofs houses, the ventilated metal roofs. And what we're showing here is more mortality of the mosquitoes in the hot metal roof houses. And this is the temperature profile of the ventilated metal roof houses getting very hot in the afternoon. And of course, after doing that for a year, I said, well, that's a crap experiment. It's not what people would be interested in, because it's not the ventilated houses people want to know about. They want to know about proper metal roof houses in the Gambia. So we had to go back and repeat the experiments. And we're getting the same thing here in metal roof houses. Now, the important thing about malaria is to reduce transmission, what you really need to hit is the survival of the vector population. So although these differences look relatively small, we know from the Ross MacDonald model that they would have a big impact on the overall intensity of transmission. So my hypothesis is, that I'm presenting to you, that those metal roof houses are very hot in the afternoon. They're going over 30 degrees centigrade and they're zapping some of our mosquitoes, almost sort of insecticidal. They're killing. So that's interesting. How am I doing for time? Fine. One of the things I think is really important is that there's a real opportunities here for innovators to create things, better products for screening houses. There's 2 things we need to come up with, literally a bulletproof screening and better doors. So we did some experiments looking at better doors, and we followed the theme of the evolution of these doors which are louvered, which are very common in Francophone West Africa. I'm sure that those of you that have travelled to Mali, Burkina Faso, Senegal, these doors are familiar. So that was the basis of our roof store, that it's louvered on the outside, screened on the inside, but it's a problem. Remember I was telling you about the small boys ripping the doors. It's not a good idea. So we came up with working from folk from Global Good in Seattle with this door that was designed by my friend Jakob Knudsen. And what's neat about this is that it's all made from the same material. So you haven't got that problem that you have with the roof stores of fitting 2 materials together, because that's mayhem. That's a real building problem. And what we've got here is a door which, when you look at it straight on, like you do here, it gives you privacy. But underneath there are these little holes which are not big enough for a mosquito to get through, but allows air to ventilate inside. And it's self-closing. So you hold open the door, let it go, it closes. So what we did was a series of pilot studies with different types of door. Here's the door I showed earlier, but we've got other variants on this. And this is our standard Gambian door. What's really neat about Gambian doors is they are all the same size, because that's a piece of sheeting that you get for the roof, okay? So it's a standard size. You can mass produce this stuff. Easy. All the same size. So I thought you'd enjoy seeing how we actually put the doors in. So this is unpacking our boxes. These are made from by some other engineers that built parts for the Hadron Collider, and then they come down and make doors for me, poor things. And then we're taking them into a household, and here's our local builder, very gently persuading the mud blocks to move away. do note the safety equipment that on day 3 that this gentleman's using on his feet, despite being given steel toe-cap shoes. And also the safety ladder. What we're doing here is binding the windows carefully because we're cementing them in and we don't want any cracks, so we're making sure they're really secure. This is Jakob Knudsen, that looks a nice man, but he's absolutely nasty because if it's not perfect, the window or the door comes out and they have to start again. It was toe-curlingly embarrassing watching him at times. The rest of us were mortified by it. Anyhow, okay, so that's our doors. These are the results that we got when we looking at all mosquitoes coming in. Part of the problem here is that people bloody spraying actelic inside all the houses, so that wasn't a great help to us actually. But anyhow, that's what we're showing here is that we've overall reduced mosquito abundance by 2/3. And you think, well, self-closing doors, why don't we get better performance than that? I mean, 2/3 is okay. And one of the things that we did was we put data loggers in all the houses to measure when the doors were opening and closing during the night. And what you can see here is opening and closing during the day. So this is 7 in the morning, busy, busy, busy. Then in the evening, people get really busy because they're going to the mosque, they're getting things from inside, water to drink for the evening meal. But what I was surprised at was just how busy they are until midnight. And it's only after midnight do the numbers start dropping off. This is the old pars like myself that need to go out for pee during the night or something. So human behavior, as with anything, is an issue. So I'm not selling these ideas as being solutions, total solutions. Human behavior is really an important part of things. So far I've been talking about products, and I showed you the experiments that we did, the pilot experiment with these louvered doors, which are aerating. But think back to the experiments that we ran with the screen windows, and actually maybe we don't want screen doors. Maybe we need solid doors. So the mosquitoes are going to the air coming out of the screen windows rather than the doors. And actually, if you have a screen doors, it may just help the mosquitoes to queue up outside the door, waiting for someone to open it, or to get in through a hole around the door. So we still need to work out precisely what's going on. But think big, because modifying a bad house is not a good idea. For some people, it may be better to just build new houses, and this is what Jakob Knudsen and Lawrence von Seidlein have been doing in northern Tanzania, where they've been taking Southeast Asian style houses, taking those concepts and building them in Tanzania. So this is actually made of cloth, the shade cloth. So if you grow tomatoes in the tropics, to stop them getting bleached by the sun, you would put shade cloth over it, very cheap. So this is shade cloth. And this has reduced mosquitoes by 77% of that, and 96% if you use a 2-story building. These are built for the same price as a teacher's house in Tanzania, okay? So they are expensive, they're not a public health tool, but they're affordable. So there are all sorts of solutions, and the important thing to get across is that Africa is changing rapidly. For many of us, the old silverbacks in the audience, like myself, we've grown up with thinking about typical African houses like this one, but they get changed into metal roof houses like this. This is in Uganda. Those two houses are 20 meters apart. And this is going on really undocumented until recently. But there are huge opportunities, because between now and 2050, there will be 1.2 billion extra people living in Africa. That's the present population of India being added to Africa. Doesn't matter how you do the math. that's a lot of houses that we need to build for the future. So there's an opportunity to build better houses and to help keep malaria at bay. This is a first draft of some of the work that Sam Batt and Lucy Tusting have done, looking at the changes in housing within Africa. And this paper has actually been accepted for publication in Nature, so it'll come out in a few weeks. But it shows that the change in housing, this is improvement in housing, heterogeneous though it is, Africa is transforming. By 2020, it will have the second fastest growth rate of any region in the world. So there are opportunities. So plenty of opportunities for innovation. I'm co-chair of the BOVA network, which is GCRF funding, and our focus is on screening against malaria, but it's also looking at the built environment for reducing Aedes-borne diseases, particularly in Africa. So if you're interested in that sort of stuff, look at the BOVA network. We're always interested in finding new people. So to summarize then, house design matters to how mosquitoes enter. We need new innovation, and we think this will be an important supplementary measure for reducing malaria and keeping it out after elimination. And a simple message that I've stolen again from my friend Jakob Knudsen. It's taken me a number of years before this one's settled, but the minimum is you want 2 screen windows on opposite sides of the house to keep it cool, and a bed net. That's really what we should be doing in our houses, the simplest thing to do. And you know what the professors are like, stealing the glory, but the person or the people that have done all the hard work is Ibrahim Ajata for most of this. Here he is at Walikunda with the team, including the cook. And this was him several weeks ago, graduating with his master's from Durham University, which is why I'm wearing that ridiculous outfit. So, and there we are in the village. Lots of other people to thank as well. So thank you very much for listening.
So thank you, Steve, for a really illuminating talk. So if we just, I think we've got time for questions. So maybe we can turn over to the audience. So, Hilary.
Thanks, Steve. That was lovely. Just a question about your ongoing trial, and in light of what you said about the potential community effect from the metal roofs. Is the trial randomised at the household level or village level, and is this going to be a confounding effect?
So in our trial, we've randomised so it's a household randomised controlled trial, and I think that the maximum number of metal roof houses is 4 per village. But we do actually have some indicative evidence that the more metal roof houses in a village, the lower is the parity rate. So, and it'd be interesting if people have got other data from other parts of the world to look at that. So, you know, I was also thinking about urban areas where we know that malaria is a rural disease, but in urban areas it's sort of 90% less than it is in rural areas, and urban areas almost all have metal roofs, and that may be a contributing factor to reducing it. But I think it will also depend on where the settlement is. You know, we're working in the Gambia, it's bloody hot, and cooler parts of Africa that may not have an effect at all. We went to the highlands of Ethiopia, for example.
Thanks, Steve. What do we know about why people put metal roofs on their houses? I'm just sort of thinking about what you're saying about it makes them hotter and colder, and that you can use a blanket when you're cold. So I'm kind of putting 2 and 2 together and thinking, okay, people don't care about the environment of their homes during the day, because putting why are people putting metal roofs on their houses? Is because I've heard stories about this before, but I'm not up to date on it.
So we have got a bunch of social scientists looking at that, and now, but to give you my view for what it's worth, I think it's, one, it reflects modernity. Two, perhaps more important, you don't have to re-thatch it every 4 years. And with thatch comes dirt and dust and things dropping off the ceiling. So I think that's the way it goes, and it will last longer. And actually on the heating thing, one of the things we looked at as well, which I haven't reported here, again, I'm so sad, really need to get out more, was the colour of the roof. So with a rusted roof, I mean, great thing about buildings is this is Newtonian physics, okay? So if you've got a red roof, it will absorb more solar radiation, should heat up more than a new roof, which is more reflective. So colour probably matters as well. Sorry, before I rambled, before I went off down another cul-de-sac, did that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's interesting because the things that you're measuring are not what's driving people to put metal roofs on their houses. I don't know when my brain, my cogs are whirring, but I'm just thinking there's a whole other area that we don't really know, and it probably isn't about temperature and mosquitoes.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to get my head around that.
A house is a living space. We all have our idea of that area, our special area. So yes, it's complicated.
Hi,
No,
Steve. Thanks so much. Odds ratios, they've got all that. They're well taught here. But it was really interesting. Thanks a lot. What I'm interested in is a lot of the effectiveness seems to be related to the microclimate, the housing, the people's behaviour, the species of mosquitoes. So I can see all this very thoughtful and important work going into this. Can you see generalizable lessons coming out that will then be applicable to a wide range of micro epidemiological, entomological climates?
Yeah, so the first thing is closing the eaves, okay? That's an easy fix. It doesn't cost you anything. And actually, when we first started doing our trial, the roofs trial, we couldn't find houses with thatch roof houses with open eaves. They were very rare. And then it transpired that one of my previous MSc students from the National Malaria Control Program had done something to show that if you block the eaves in, you reduce the number of malaria mosquitoes coming in. So they went around telling people that as a health promotion without telling me, buggers. And so people listened and actually changed filling in the eaves. But then that's a problem of being hot. And we do want people to use bed nets. But that's one. And then at the moment, screened windows are a good thing. If the hypothesis is correct that the odours are coming out of the screened windows. And about the door, we don't know about. But, I think one of the things is whatever we recommend, it's happening anyhow. The metal roofs are going in. If you go to places like Dar es Salaam, people have the doors and windows fitting really tightly because they're worried about thieves, not mosquitoes. So how to manage that?
Hi Steve, I must have missed it, but you showed the number of mosquitoes getting in being dependent on the size of the screen window. Why was that? Why would a big window be different?
So what we're thinking is that two things. As you increase the size of the screened window, the only way they can get into that house is through the gaps around the doors. And when you start to increase the size of those screened windows, fewer mosquitoes go into the house, right? So why is that? Two explanations. One is, I think, the amount of CO2 inside that building is less because you don't get to high temperatures. As soon as you get to 30 degrees centigrade, people start sweating copiously and producing more volatiles, including carbon dioxide. So there's lower concentrations of attractive volatiles coming out of the doors. And secondly, and I think perhaps more importantly, but I don't know, is that if we could see what's happening with the air movement, when you put a screened window in, the host odors are coming out of that window. So it may be that the mosquitoes are accumulating around the screened window. So what you're doing is you're producing a decoy for mosquitoes. So then you can begin to think, how can I move the air in a house in such a way that mosquitoes can't find it or go to a part of the building that they can't find an entrance to? But we need Phil to get his video cameras to see what they actually do rather than what I think they do. But he's always complaining about being too busy.
Hi. You mentioned at the end how you're interested in applying this to AEDs.
Mm-hmm.
And you also referred to housing from Southeast Asia. And I was wondering how you respond to problems like dengue, which in a place like Singapore is a huge problem, and actually quality of housing doesn't seem to really have impacted there. How do you respond to that?
It's always the Singapore thing. Whenever anyone you talk about dengue, give you Singapore. What do we know about Singapore? Singapore is such a cosmopolitan, unusual place. What I'm suggesting is that, so my view is that housing is not a total solution. I certainly wouldn't say that at all, but so what I'm trying to say is why don't we think about housing as well, or the built environment as well? And so when it comes to dengue, is if we can reduce some of the aquatic habitats for Aedes aegypti, isn't that a good thing if we try and reduce it? By reliable piped water, by refuse collection, so we don't have pockets of, we don't have rubbish which will accumulate water in. Because, and another side, my other sideline is I'm very worried about diseases like yellow fever getting to Southeast Asia, to an urban environment where we won't have enough vaccine, millions of people are under threat. We should need to consider making our cities safer and more resilient against the threat of Aedes-borne diseases. Is my preaching from the pulpit. Mm-hmm. Hi.
Hi, Steve. So you talked about the effect that the difference in temperature profile between thatched and metal houses can have on the survival of mosquitoes. Am I right in saying that it can also affect the survival of the parasites inside the mosquito if it takes an infective blood meal?
Yeah. Yes, in fact, no, absolutely. So I think it will be sterilizing the parasite in the mosquito as well. And I'm thinking there's been I think it's Matt Thomas has done published recently on that to show that. Yeah, I mean, years ago when I first started working in that particular part of the Gambia, they have large numbers of mosquitoes in the dry season when they're growing the crops, but we couldn't find an infective mosquito. And I assumed that was because those high temperatures, it gets up to 40 degrees, 45 degrees centigrade in the shade, is just killing the parasite in the mosquito, as well as affecting the survival of the adult mosquito as well.
Thank you. I just wanted to find out if there's any standard recommendation of building houses in rural areas to control such infections, and also looking at alternative resources. The way I look at some of the items that were being used could be very expensive. I don't know for a standard African community.
So, so the first question was about whether there are building regulations. So they are, whether there are building regulations in different parts of Africa. I think for how you build your houses or how you look after the areas around the house, but they're rarely followed through. The exception I can think of is in Khartoum, where when you build houses, you probably know you build a pit, a cement-lined pit to store water. And in Khartoum, the law was you can only have those pits while you're building the house. As soon as the house is built, then you do away with the cement-lined pit. And so Hamuda Kafi, who ran the control program in Khartoum, broke down those, used that bylaw to insist that those aquatic habitats, which were producing huge numbers of arabiensis, Anopheles arabiensis, were broken down. So that's an example of where you could use bylaws to enforce destruction of aquatic habitats. Price. So the average price of a door in the African market in Gambia or Tanzania is about $120. People are paying a lot for doors. The doors that I was showing you could be mass-produced far more cheaply. And I think what you would have to do is you would have to have different qualities of products for depending on how much people could afford. People are changing it, building better houses across Africa. It's not uniform, but they do, as probably you and I do, when you have a bit of money, you build something extra onto the house. You build the foundations, the brick walls, eventually the roof. So it's not all together. So I think to fund these sort of initiatives, I think it's certainly not going to come from the health budget, all right? Absolutely not. These are much larger sums of money needed, but they come from the people themselves. So there are microfinance initiatives which are being developed specifically for housing in Southern Africa and Eastern Africa as well. So there are ways of getting funding out to people. And if you think, oh, that's expensive, fill eaves in. How much is that going to cost? So there's something.
Okay, so I'm curious about the roof. Here you're using the metal roof. Why you don't using tile? So just because it easy carry?
So you could use tiles, but I haven't seen tiles are actually rarely used in Africa. Most of it is corrugate, and the quality of the corrugate, I mean, it's incredibly thin and very cheap. So, so it's cheapness. I think that would be much cheaper than tile. It's interesting, when we started our roofs project, we were going to build the doors out of wood, but the wood was more expensive than steel. So it's about cost.
Okay, well we're just past 2 o'clock now, so we better wrap that up. But if anyone would like to have a chat with Steve, as long as he doesn't mind.
Yeah, no, please.
Have a kind of open session over in the accelerator, ground floor foyer, coffee area. So around about between 3 and 4. Particularly encourage students, but absolutely open to everyone. So just like to thank you very much, Steve. It was a fantastic talk and a great question and answer session again as well. Thank you.